Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope you're all doing well today. Today I've got some terrifying Dogman encounters to share with you. But before we get into these encounters, a couple links I'd like to share. As you know, I rely on my Patreon, my PayPal, and my merch to help this channel to continue to grow and go. Those links are in the description below. I also have a second channel for creepypasta, fanfiction, and scary voice acting. Stories that don't fit on this channel. Now, if that's anything that you're into, follow that link and give those stories a listen. You may just like what you hear. I also started a GoFundMe page to help raise some money for urbex, cryptid hunting, and ghost hunting equipment. So far, I have an EVP recorder, an SLS cam, and some trail cams. If that's anything that you're willing to help with, that link is also in the description below. Now, I've taken enough of your time. Let's get on with these Dogman encounters. Shall we? Today's first Dogman encounter. It was the winter of 1913 on a frosty and dark winter night. A misty coldness descended upon New York City. The cold crept along the parks and streets of the Bronx, seeping in through every crack and crevice of every respectful home scattered about. Near the Moshulu Parkway, just below the dense tree line that existed back then, something strange lurked. A creature described as werewolf-like by those unlucky enough to have stumbled across that path at night. Even more astonishing was the fact that many were also describing a soft glow emanating from that creature. Many believed this to be a rumor. However, late one December night, the creature stepped out of the shadows and into the sleepy streets of the Bronx. That night, the phones rang off the hooks at the Kingsbridge police station. The reports were bizarre and the callers sounded frantic. Whatever it was that the callers were reporting undoubtedly sent extra chills down their spines that cold night. The animal's eyes gleamed with a pale, piercing light, reported a witness, adding that the light resembled phosphorescence in the wake of a ship at sea. Others reported sparks flying out of the creature's mouth as it snarled at them. A creature they could only describe as werewolf-like. A horrible beast, a mutated canine of sorts with a pair of glowing eyes. However absurd or horrifying the report seemed, the Bronx precinct had a duty to venture out into the cold and investigate. That night, the Kingsbridge station sent down a few of their men to investigate the source of these frantic callers. Kingsbridge Police Captain Matt Keenan issued an alert to his squad to be on the lookout for a supposed werewolf, as well as a recent mugging that occurred near the Moshulu Parkway. While patrolling the desolate parkway, Officer McKieran came across 4 suspicious men who were loitering around an unlit area on the parkway. Thinking that these may be the muggers, he approached the 4 men. The men suddenly took off running in different directions, and a short chase ensued, ending with Officer McKieran catching one of the suspects. As the policeman cuffed the perp, a sudden, sharp pain shot up the officer's leg. Looking down at his leg, he was horrified to see what he could only describe as a phosphorus-covered hound clamping down on his boot. The officer acted quickly and used his nightstick to deliver a heavy blow to the creature's skull, forcing it to release the officer's leg from its vice-like grip. The officer and his perp were able to get away from the glowing creature and make it back safely to the precinct. After booking the man at the station, the officer told the rest of the men what had transpired out on the parkway. Soon a squad of men from Kingsbridge Precinct made their way to the exact spot the beast had taken a beating from a frightened officer's nightstick. To their relief, there was no sign of the beast. No glowing set of eyes, no bulking canine doused in phosphorus glow. The parkway remained still, frozen in an eerie silence until the warming sun broke. a soft morning glow that had pushed back the icy shadows and its eerie inhabitants for at least another day that winter in 1913. This bizarre report and claim comes from the 1913, December 19th edition of Santa Fe, New Mexican newspaper. What did the residents of the Bronx experience that December night? We may never know. Was it an overactive imagination or possibly an episode of mass hysteria? Today's second Dogman encounter. Thick trees surrounded the property where 7-year-old Stephen met the strange dog, a dog with red glowing eyes, a dog that sometimes walked on 2 legs. Stephen lived in Romulus, Michigan, a farmhouse with his mother, his uncle, and his mother's boyfriend. They raised chickens and rabbits, with farm cats roaming the crumbling old barn on a small acreage. But it was the woods that separated the house from the nearby major road, woods that kept the house and family hidden. That marred Stephen's childhood. Those woods harbored something dark. We had this really strange dog creature that would hang around the property, Stephen states. I say dog creature because this thing was far too big and intelligent to be a stray dog. The dog was as big as a Great Dane, seemed to have the upper part of a German Shepherd and lower part of a Doberman Pinscher. However, its eyes were what haunted Stephen. It had a very pronounced red eyes, Stephen states. I'm not saying it was a werewolf or a dogman, but it was werewolf-like. Everyone who lived in the house saw this beast. The dog would frequently stalk the edge of the woods on our property in that day. Stephen states it seemed to have no fear. My uncle would yell at it and throw things towards it and try to scare it off, but it would simply rear up on its hind legs like a ram and charge at him a short distance. The dog never reached my uncle or anyone else who lived in the farmhouse. However, it did reach other things on the farm. We would frequently find dead chickens or rabbits after thunderstorms. We knew it was the dog thing because it would leave huge paw prints in the mud and claw marks on the window ledges. The thing eventually turned its attention to our house. Sometimes we would find the screens ripped from our screen doors and windows. It would never outright attack us, but it did seem to enjoy taunting us and harassing us. The taunting quickly became dangerous when the dog spoke. One summer night, my mom had left the window open in my bedroom to cool off the room so I could sleep, Stephen states. She was on her way to the bathroom and went by my room and heard me talking to someone. Stopping at her son's door well after his bedtime, she thought he was playing. She opened the bedroom door and turned the lights on and saw the dog. When she opened the door, she saw me standing in my bed, and I apparently had wet my PJs. I was talking towards the window. I wasn't screaming or freaking out, but seemed to be transfixed and talking in a low voice towards the window. Stephen didn't notice his mother, nor did he notice the tungsten light that suddenly poured the yellow glow throughout the bedroom. His focus was on what was at the window. When she looked towards the window, the dog had its 2 front paws pushed through the screen and was looking through the window at us and making a low growl, Stephen states. Its eyes glared red. Stephen's mother threw a beer bottle she had carried at the beast's face. Startled, it backed out of the window. She slammed the window shut and closed the blinds. The dog's thing's presence, however, was not gone. My mom told me that for about a week or so after that I acted very strange, like the way a kid acts in a movie, The Shining. I would say things like, "We don't want you here," "Our ghosts are food," or "God thinks you're bad." The house cats would run terrified when Stephen entered the room for the time of madness. that wasn't the only thing wrong. For some reason, I would take sewing needles or anything sharp I could find and prick my fingers till they would bleed, and then finger paint all over the walls with blood, he states. The house was also very strong smelling of septic tank for a few days. Lights would burn out and pop and weird things would just happen. 2 weeks after the dog tried to coax Stephen out of his room, everything stopped. My uncle was out back working on his truck when he saw the dog at the edge of the woods, making its way towards the rabbit pen. At this point, he was tired of dealing with it and went into the house and grabbed his gun. Apparently, he fired at it and hit it. The dog turned and ran into the woods, and we didn't see it anymore after that. Everything seemed to clear up. But the dog thing will be with him forever. I always recall its eyes, Stephen, now 40, states. You could see its eyes out in the woods sometimes at night. I have bad dreams about it from time to time. Today's third encounter. When I was a boy, my mother and I lived with my grandfather, who had a farmhouse in a rural location in southwestern Pennsylvania. My grandfather was a handyman who also worked a small blacksmith shop in his old barn. My grandmother had died before I was born, and my father had also passed away while serving overseas in the military. Beginning in the summer of 1946, we noticed strange howling sounds coming from the woods that surrounded the property. The activity came at night and was very frightening when the howling came close. The sounds didn't seem to bother my grandfather, though. My mother and I were shaken when it would begin. The sounds continued off and on for about a year, but we never noticed any animals. My grandfather and I would hunt for deer and squirrel in the woods during the cooler months, but we never saw signs of any unusual animal activity. One late afternoon in the spring of 1947, I was helping my grandfather in his shop when I noticed something moving around the edge of the woods, near an area where my grandfather had a few junk cars and other items. It was about 200 feet from our location, but I clearly noticed someone or something moving around. I told my grandfather to look, and he walked to the door, lit his pipe, and said nothing. After a minute or two, he turned around and got back to his work. About that time, this thing moved into the woods and disappeared. I couldn't judge how big it was, but it sort of reminded me of a magazine picture I had seen of a large ape that was said to inhabit the Asian jungles. Later that evening, I told my mother what I had seen, and she was shocked because she knew I wouldn't lie to her and that the howling sounds had been closer lately. I also told her that my grandfather's response when I pointed out to the creature to him. She immediately stood up and walked into the sitting room in order to ask my grandfather what it was. He started to shake his head slowly and said that he was hoping that we would see it because he was worried we would be scared and leave him. After assuring him that we would never leave him, my mother again insisted that he tell us what this creature was. He looked away and took a deep breath and said it was a dark walker, and said that it had lived in the woods for many years. He said the native Indians called it a stone spirit, and they thought it was an evil spirit who would appear when someone was about to die. The last time he had seen a dark walker was the night before my grandmother had passed. My mother was skeptical of the harbinger of death angle, but she sensed that there was something unnatural of nearby. The howling continued each night, though we hadn't seen any signs of the dark walker. One warm evening, we were sitting on the back porch. There were a few howls, but it seemed like the sounds were further away. We were listening to the radio when all at once my grandfather stood up and looked out towards the barn. He turned to me and said, "Go and get my pistol and ammo and hurry now." I ran into the sitting room and grabbed the .455 Webley revolver and a handful of bullets from the old steamer trunk. I handed it to him and watched him load the gun. He then picked up a hatchet and slid it into his pant belt. Now, both of you get into the house. We were in the kitchen looking through the screen door and watching my grandfather walk slowly towards the barn. We saw him turn and walk out of sight into the dark. I decided to grab my shotgun and keep it nearby. After a minute or so, we heard 3 gunshots and a blood-curdling scream come from the woods near the barn. Then it suddenly stopped and it was completely quiet. We were frozen and wondering if we should go and look for my grandfather. A few seconds later, we heard him yell, "Stay in the house until I come back." I heard the pickup start, and I looked out towards the storage room window and saw my grandfather drive to the back of the barn and park. Several minutes later, he backed up and drove by the side of the house and out onto the road. I could see that there was something in the back covered with a tarp. It was getting late, so my mother told me to go to bed. The next morning, I came downstairs and sat beside my grandfather, who was reading the newspaper and drinking a cup of coffee. My mother was sitting at the other end of the table, staring at my grandfather. Not long later, she said, "Well, Dad, tell him." My grandfather put the paper down and looked at me. "I killed the Dark Walker." That's all he said. My mother told me not to tell anyone, and that the matter was closed. We never talked about it again after that. My grandfather lived another 15 years, and my mother stayed with him until his dying day. When I grew older, I moved away and raised a family. I would return home to visit each summer, and never heard another howl. Wow, guys. Were they incredible encounters, or what? I want to apologize first for my raspy voice. It's humid as all hell in upstate New York. And every time it gets humid, no matter what I do, if I pound water or drink hot tea or whatever, I always get a frog in my throat. And it's always when I'm sitting in my studio trying to record for you guys. But enough of that shit. These encounters were awesome. I picked these 3 to put together because there's a little something I want to share with you at the end of all this. But 1913, New York City, the Bronx, there was farms and barns and stuff in the city back then. You go look at pictures. So it isn't how it is now, So there is definitely room back then for this creature to exist. You've got islands off the Hudson and stuff like that. Plum Island, we all know about Plum Island and the government's experiments and shit like that going on there, but that's another day. The second encounter, just crazy. They say they saw it standing. We've heard so many different accounts of these Dogman being able to speak to you, mentally. Maybe this is what that creature was doing. Maybe it just wanted to cause torment. Maybe this one was just pure evil. This one creature out in Michigan. Obviously the one in New York City is, because it just took a chunk out of the dude's leg. He's just arresting a mugger. The third encounter, the Dark Walker. What an amazing tale. Another older tale from 1947. All of these had some age to them. They're not just like modern day, and that's what's cool about it too. That, and they had the paranormal aspect, this creepy, it's creepy enough you're seeing a creature, but then they have these powers, these little quirks to them. I don't know. I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I know I did. So with that, before I say farewell, I've got one other thing I want to share with you. Skinwalker stories are not a product of modern entertainment or Hollywood. The stories come from generations of Native Americans all over the United States, from people of this land that honed the peculiar skill of observation, observing nature and animals to learn how to live off the land and be in harmony with Mother Earth. From them, the stories of skinwalkers and were-creatures come from here in the States. To this day, many people from different backgrounds claim to have come across creatures that resemble 6-foot-tall timber wolves, walking and running on 2 legs. Bipedal upright canines that differ in description from Sasquatch sightings. Whether you believe it or not, people are still reporting them to this day. And with that, guys, I bid you farewell.